She had always thought her neighborhood was peaceful, a place where life flowed gently and predictably. The streets were lined with green trees, and the sidewalks were clean. And there was a sense of order that came from the Homeowners Association, which was strict but mostly invisible. She enjoyed walking around in the evenings, waving at neighbors, and watching children play in the yards. Everything seemed calm, orderly, and safe. She had bought her home with a dream in mind, imagining quiet weekends and simple evenings, and for a while, that was exactly what she had. It started with a small envelope slipped under the door one morning. She picked it up casually, expecting perhaps a friendly notice about a neighborhood event or a simple reminder about fees. Instead, it was a warning from the HOA. They claimed that part of her yard did not meet the community standards. She frowned, trying to see what could be wrong. The grass was neatly cut, the flower beds looked cared for, and the fences were intact. Nothing seemed out of place. She set the letter aside, hoping it was just a mistake. A week later, another notice arrived. This time it was more serious. The HOA claimed that the shrubs along the side of the house were too high and that she needed to trim them immediately or face fines. She walked to the side yard and studied the shrubs carefully. They were healthy, green, and perfectly normal. Nothing seemed excessive, but she took a pair of shears and trimmed a little anyway, hoping that would satisfy them. Despite her efforts, the notices kept coming. Each letter seemed harsher than the last, warning of penalties and threats of action. She tried to call the HOA office to clarify what was happening. The receptionist was polite but unhelpful, saying that all decisions came from the board and that she needed to wait for their response. Weeks passed, and the anxiety began to grow. She'd never imagined that owning a home could feel so stressful. She started talking to neighbors to see if anyone else had similar problems. Some shrugged and said they had faced small issues before, nothing serious. Others looked nervous and quickly walked away, clearly worried about mentioning the HOA at all. The more she learned, the more she realized that the HOA had a reputation for being strict and sometimes unreasonable. But she did not expect what was coming next. One morning, she stepped outside to find men in uniforms walking around her yard. She froze, unsure what they were doing. One of them approached her and explained that they were sent by the HOA to remove certain structures and make changes to the property that supposedly violated community rules. Her heart sank as she watched them begin to dismantle a small shed she had built herself, one she had maintained for years. She tried to argue, showing them pictures, receipts, and even mentioning that she had not received any warning before this sudden action. They nodded politely, but continued working, leaving her feeling powerless. Her backyard, once her safe and private space, now looked invaded and chaotic. The fences were partially removed, her flower beds trampled, and the shed gone. She walked around in disbelief, trying to understand how this could happen. How could they just enter her property and start tearing things down without proper notice or permission? She felt a mix of anger, sadness, and fear. For the first time, she realized the true power the HOA seemed to hold, at least in their eyes. She spent the next few days researching her rights and trying to contact the HOA board directly. Emails went unanswered, and phone calls were either ignored or deferred to someone else. Each day, the stress grew heavier. She could not sleep well, thinking about what might happen next. Every sound outside made her jump, fearing more destruction. It was a strange mix of helplessness and determination. She had always been calm and patient, but now a fire of frustration was building inside her. Her neighbors started to notice the changes. Some were sympathetic, offering words of encouragement. Others stayed silent, either afraid of the HOA or unwilling to get involved. The community, which had seemed friendly and supportive, now felt cold and distant. She realized that standing up to the HOA would not be easy, and that she might face opposition at every step. But she also felt a strange sense of resolve. She knew she had to protect her home, no matter what it took, as she continued her research. She stumbled upon some old documents related to her property, titles, surveys, and previous ownership records. She began to read carefully, trying to make sense of the legal language. There were references to the land she owned, some parts of which she had assumed were shared or governed by the HOA. The more she read, the more she realized that she might have had more rights than she had ever imagined. She had never questioned the HOA's authority before, assuming that their rules were absolute. Now, for the first time, she wondered if she had been mistaken all along. Days turned into weeks. And each interaction with the HOA was a mixture of frustration and uncertainty. They continued sending notices, sometimes threatening fines, sometimes warning of legal action. Yet, she noticed small inconsistencies in their claims, tiny details that did not match up with the documents she had found. Each inconsistency became a small spark of hope. She started keeping detailed notes, photographing the yard, and saving every letter. She was building a record, slowly but surely, that might one day prove crucial. She also noticed something else. The men sent by the HOA seemed confident, almost careless. They moved through her property as if they had unquestionable authority, but she began to see cracks in their procedure. They were following instructions, but the instructions themselves were not entirely correct. The rules they cited were vague or outdated. It became clear to her that the HOA might be acting based on assumptions rather than facts. This realization was both alarming and empowering. She understood that she might have a chance to challenge them, but it would require careful preparation and courage. In the evenings, she would sit on her porch, looking at what remained of her garden and thinking about how quickly her peaceful life had been disrupted. The sounds of the neighborhood seemed different, now less friendly, more tense. Children played quietly, neighbors whispered in hushed tones, and the air carried a strange weight. She felt a mix of sadness for what was lost and determination for what needed to be done. She realized that this was no longer just about property. It was about respect, fairness, and standing up for herself. One night, she reviewed her documents and notes. She made a decision. She would not let the HOA continue to destroy her property or intimidate her. She would fight back, not with anger or rash actions, but with knowledge, patience, and persistence. She would learn everything she could about her rights, gather evidence, and prepare to confront the situation head-on. The thought was daunting, but it also filled her with a strange sense of purpose. She had bought this home with dreams and hope, and she would not allow anyone to take that away from her. The quiet life she had once known was gone, replaced by a challenging and uncertain reality. But in the midst of fear and frustration, she discovered a new strength within herself. She realized that sometimes life presents unexpected battles. And true resilience is revealed not in comfort, but in how one responds to adversity. She would face the HOA, piece by piece, letter by letter, and reclaim control over her life and property. The journey was just beginning, and she knew that each step would test her resolve, but she was ready. Her home, her sanctuary, and her sense of justice were worth every effort, and she would not back down. The days after the destruction were heavy and tense. She felt a constant weight in her chest, a mix of disbelief and anger. Her backyard, once full of life and color, now looked incomplete and broken. The flowers that had bloomed so beautifully, the shed that had held her tools and memories, and the fences that had created a sense of privacy, all of it had been disturbed. Walking through the remnants, she could not stop asking herself how something like this could happen. She had always followed the rules, paid her fees, and tried to be a considerate neighbor. Yet now, she was left with chaos where there had been order. Every time she heard footsteps or the sound of a truck, her heart would race. The neighborhood seemed quieter, almost as if the usual chatter had been replaced by tension. She began noticing small things she had never paid attention to before. The HOA signs at the entrance looked more intimidating. The mailboxes seemed less friendly, and the once smiling neighbors now seemed to avoid her eyes. She realized she was no longer just a homeowner. She had become a target, or at least someone the HOA had singled out. Her attempts to communicate with the HOA only added to her frustration. Emails went unanswered. Phone calls were deferred. And when she did manage to reach someone, the responses were vague and unhelpful. They told her that the actions were standard procedure and that she should comply to avoid fines. But she had no idea what rules she had supposedly violated. It felt like being trapped in a system designed to confuse and intimidate. Determined not to give up, She spent hours each day going through her property documents. She read over deeds, surveys, and historical records, trying to understand what was really hers and what the HOA could even claim authority over. The legal language was complex, filled with terms she had never encountered, but she did not let that stop her. She highlighted passages, made notes, and compared old maps with what existed in her yard. She began to see patterns and inconsistencies. Parts of the property the HOA had assumed were communal or under their control were, in fact, entirely hers. The realization sparked a glimmer of hope amid the frustration. Despite this small victory, the emotional toll was significant. She found herself waking up in the middle of the night worrying about what the HOA might do next. She imagined crews showing up to remove more structures, fines piling up, or even legal actions being taken against her. The fear was real, and it seeped into every aspect of her life. Yet at the same time, there was a growing determination inside her. She knew she could not remain passive. She had to stand up, not just for herself, but for the integrity of her property and the principle of fairness. Neighbors began to notice the changes in her demeanor. Some approached cautiously, offering sympathy and small gestures of support. Others stayed distant, either too afraid to get involved or unwilling to confront the HOA themselves. She realized that, while some people may have faced similar problems, fear often kept them silent. This understanding did not make the loneliness any easier, but it reinforced her resolve. She would not be silenced, and she would not let intimidation control her life. One afternoon, she decided to take action. She started by documenting the destruction. She took photos of the trampled flower beds, the partially removed fences, and the space where the shed had stood. Each photo captured not just physical damage, but also the emotional weight of what had been lost. She compiled all the letters, notices, and emails from the HOA into a single organized folder. She even recorded dates, times, and conversations with HOA representatives. Every detail mattered. This record would be her shield and her weapon in the coming battle. As she prepared her evidence, she also began talking to a lawyer. The first meeting was intimidating. Legal language and procedures felt overwhelming, but the lawyer reassured her that her case was strong. They explained her rights as a homeowner, the limitations of the HOA's authority, the steps she could take to reclaim control of her property. She left the meeting feeling both anxious and empowered. Knowledge was her ally, and she was determined to use it wisely. The more she learned, the more she realized how many mistakes the HOA had made. They had acted without proper notice, misinterpreted rules, and ignored documentation that clearly supported her ownership. Each discovery strengthened her belief that she could fight back. She started making a plan, step by step, for how to confront them, how to restore her property, and how to ensure they could not interfere again. Even as she focused on strategy, her emotions remained raw. Some days, tears came easily, and frustration bubbled over. She felt the unfairness deeply and longed for a return to the peaceful life she had once known. Other days, she felt a surge of strength, a sense that she was learning to navigate a world she had never wanted to confront. The battle was not just against the HOA, but also against fear and helplessness. Each day brought new challenges, but also new lessons about resilience, courage, and persistence. In the evenings, she walked around her property, imagining how it could look once it was restored. She envisioned a garden blooming again, fences standing proudly, and the shed rebuilt. She imagined herself standing there with a sense of accomplishment and pride. These visions fueled her determination, giving her a sense of purpose even on the toughest days. She also began paying closer attention to her neighbors. Conversations became more strategic. She asked about their experiences, listened carefully, and noted who might be willing to support her if the situation escalated. She understood that community could be a source of strength, even if not everyone was willing to speak openly. Slowly, she began to build a network of quiet support. People who understood that the HOA's authority was not absolute and that the homeowner had rights worth defending. The HOA, unaware of her growing knowledge and preparation, continued with their notices and threats. Each time, she responded calmly and firmly, citing her research and documentation. She made it clear, through letters and emails, that she was aware of her rights and that any further unauthorized actions would be challenged. This measured response was unlike the panic they might have expected, and it gave her a growing sense of control. She realized that the journey ahead would not be easy. There would be confrontations, legal hurdles, and emotional stress, but she also understood that this was an opportunity to reclaim not just her property, but her confidence and her sense of justice. The destruction had been painful, but it had also awakened a determination she did not know she possessed. She was no longer just a homeowner, living quietly. She was an advocate for herself, ready to take a stand. As the weeks passed, she became more organized and confident. She had a clear record of events, a legal strategy, and a vision for restoring her property. She had turned fear into preparation, frustration into action, and sadness into determination. The HOA's attempts to intimidate her now faced a quiet but firm resistance. She knew that the coming days would test her patience and resolve, but she also knew that she was ready to face them. The foundation for her fight was laid, and she felt a growing sense of hope that justice, in the end, could prevail. Her life, once predictable and peaceful, had become a complex battle for her home. Yet within this challenge, she discovered strength, clarity, and courage she had never known. Each day, she learned more about herself, about her rights, and about the importance of standing firm in the face of unfairness. The destruction had shaken her, but it had also awakened a new sense of purpose. And so, she prepared herself for the next stage, knowing that while the path ahead would be difficult, she had the determination and resilience to face it head-on. As she continued to study the documents and surveys, a surprising realization began to form in her mind. Pieces of information she had previously overlooked started to make sense when combined. She discovered that much of the land the HOA claimed as common areas or community property was actually part of her legal ownership. The backyard, the side paths, and even a portion of land that bordered other properties were all, according to official deeds, her responsibility. She had never questioned the HOA's authority before, assuming that their rules applied universally, but now it was clear that they had overstepped. The realization was powerful and a little frightening. She had been living under a misconception about her rights for years. Her first instinct was disbelief. Could it really be that the HOA had no authority over these parts of her property? She read through each document carefully, comparing dates, signatures, and maps. The survey lines were precise, and the descriptions were clear. She began to feel a mix of shock and excitement. Not only had the HOA acted wrongly, but she also had undeniable proof that she owned more than she thought. It was almost like discovering a hidden treasure, a piece of her life that had been waiting for her to find. She spent days organizing all the evidence. Each document was carefully placed in folders, labeled and cross-referenced. She created a timeline of events, noting each HOA notice, each visit, and each instance of property destruction. She took more photographs, capturing the exact state of the yard and comparing it with historical images. Every small detail mattered. She understood that if she ever needed to confront the HOA legally, she had to be prepared and precise. At first, she hesitated to share her discovery with anyone. She wanted to make sure she had everything right before taking action. Sharing too soon could invite doubt, or worse, retaliation from the HOA. Instead, she focused on learning more about property law, rights of homeowners, and HOA regulations. She read articles, legal guides, and even online forums where other homeowners shared similar experiences. Each piece of knowledge strengthened her confidence and gave her a sense of direction as she dug deeper. She realized that her situation was not unique. Many homeowners had faced similar overreach from HOAs, often due to miscommunication, outdated records, or careless management. What made her case different was that she had clear documentation proving that she had full ownership of the land in question. The feeling of empowerment grew. She understood that knowledge was her greatest weapon, and she was ready to use it strategically. With her documents organized and her knowledge growing, she finally decided it was time to involve a professional. She contacted a lawyer who specialized in property disputes. The lawyer reviewed all her documents carefully, nodding as she presented each piece of evidence. He confirmed that her ownership was indisputable and that the HOA had acted outside its authority. This confirmation brought a deep sense of relief. She was not imagining things. She truly had the legal backing to reclaim her property. The lawyer also explained the next steps. She would need to formally notify the HOA of her findings, request a halt to any further actions, and, if necessary, seek restitution for the destruction that had already occurred. Legal action was a possibility, but the lawyer emphasized that her strong documentation put her in a favorable position. She left the meeting feeling both nervous and determined. The path ahead would not be easy, but now she had clarity and direction. Armed with this knowledge, she prepared a letter to the HOA, detailing her findings and asserting her rights. She included copies of the surveys, deeds, and photographs, leaving no room for dispute. Writing the letter was a careful process. She wanted it to be firm but not aggressive. It was a formal declaration that she understood her ownership and would not allow further interference. She sent it via certified mail to ensure there was a record of receipt in the days that followed. She waited anxiously for a response. Each day felt long and uncertain. She walked around her property, imagining the next steps and wondering how the HOA would react. She knew they might resist or try to downplay her claims, but she also understood that the truth was on her side. She focused on patience, reminding herself that persistence would be key in this battle. Finally, a response arrived. The HOA acknowledged receipt of her letter, but their tone was defensive. They claimed that their previous actions had been based on old records and misinterpretations of property lines. They did not admit to wrongdoing directly, but suggested a willingness to discuss the matter further. She knew that this was not a full victory, but it was a start. The HOA could no longer act as if she had no rights. She had forced them to acknowledge her position. During this time, she also began reconnecting with her neighbors in a different way. She shared her findings selectively, finding those who were trustworthy and who had faced similar issues. Some neighbors expressed relief that someone had uncovered the truth, while others admitted that they had been too intimidated to question the HOA themselves. She realized that her actions could inspire others to understand their rights and stand up for themselves. This thought gave her additional motivation and a sense of responsibility. The emotional journey was intense. She experienced moments of doubt and frustration, wondering if the HOA would continue to resist or find ways to complicate matters. Yet, each time she reviewed her documents and the legal confirmation, she felt renewed confidence. She had turned a situation that once seemed hopeless into an opportunity to reclaim control. She was learning that resilience was not just about reacting, but about preparing, understanding, and acting strategically. As she prepared for the next phase, she started to plan the restoration of her property. She made lists of repairs, improvements, and landscaping projects that would bring the yard back to life. Each item on the list was a step toward reclaiming her space and asserting her ownership. The act of planning became therapeutic, giving her a sense of hope and focus. She envisioned the yard blooming again, the shed rebuilt, and fences restored to create the privacy and security she had lost. Each vision reinforced her determination to follow through. She also anticipated possible resistance from the HOA. They might challenge her findings, delay proceedings, or attempt to negotiate from a position of perceived authority. She prepared for these scenarios by discussing strategies with her lawyer, rehearsing responses, and considering the evidence that could counter any objections. Preparation became a form of empowerment, placing fear with action and uncertainty with confidence. Throughout this time, she reflected on the lessons learned. She realized that the situation had forced her to become more vigilant, informed, and assertive. She had discovered a side of herself that was capable of careful analysis, strategic thinking, and standing firm under pressure. The challenge, though difficult, had revealed strengths she had never fully recognized. It was a profound personal growth experience. Intertwined with the practical task of reclaiming her property, each day brought new insights. She observed how communities could sometimes become rigid and bureaucratic, how fear could silence individuals, and how knowledge and persistence could turn the tide. She felt a deep sense of responsibility, not just for herself, but for the principles of fairness and justice in her neighborhood. She was determined to see this through, ensuring that her home remained a place of safety, pride, and ownership in the quiet moments. She would sit in what remained of her garden, reflecting on the journey so far. The destruction, the confusion, and the confrontation with the HOA had been painful, but they had also awakened a clarity of purpose. She was no longer a passive homeowner. She was an active protector of her rights and her property. Each decision she made, each piece of evidence she organized, and each step she took reinforced her sense of control and empowerment. The discovery of her full ownership transformed the way she viewed the conflict. It was no longer simply about stopping the HOA's actions. It was about asserting her rights, restoring her property, and ensuring that such overreach could not happen again. The process was meticulous and sometimes exhausting, but it was also invigorating. She felt a sense of purpose that carried her through the uncertainty and fear. As Part 3 concluded, she stood at a turning point. She had uncovered the truth about her ownership, organized her evidence, consulted legal expertise, and prepared to challenge the HOA formally. The emotional journey had strengthened her resolve. The practical steps had built a foundation for reclaiming what was hers. She understood that the path ahead would involve confrontation, negotiation, and restoration, but she faced it with knowledge, courage, and determination. The battle was far from over, but she now knew she had the means and the will to succeed. Armed with her documents and legal advice, she felt a new determination to confront the HOA. She had spent weeks organizing every letter, photograph, survey, and deed, and she knew she was ready. Her first step was to request a formal meeting with the HOA board. She wrote a polite but firm letter explaining that she had discovered evidence proving her ownership of the disputed areas and that she wanted to discuss the matter directly. She sent the letter with confirmation of receipt, making sure there was an official record. The wait for a response was nerve-wracking. Each day, she imagined the worst-case scenarios. What if the board refused to meet? What if they tried to intimidate her further? She walked around her property, imagining all the conversations that could happen, rehearsing responses, and ensuring she could remain calm under pressure. It was exhausting, but she felt a sense of readiness she had never felt before. Finally, the response arrived. The HOA board agreed to meet, but set strict conditions. The meeting would be formal, in a neutral location, and only a limited number of people could attend. They suggested that the discussion would be limited to reviewing her documents and that any further action would be considered later. She understood that this was an attempt to control the situation, but she also knew it was a necessary first step. She accepted the conditions and prepared meticulously. The day of the meeting arrived. She felt a mixture of anxiety and resolve. She dressed simply but professionally, carrying copies of every document neatly organized in a folder. She arrived early, scanning the room and noting the expressions of the board members. They seemed confident, as if they were in control, but she felt a quiet power knowing that she had evidence they could not easily dismiss. The meeting began with formal introductions and procedural comments. The board attempted to assert their authority, reminding her of HOA rules and previous notices. She listened calmly, taking notes and waiting for her turn. When it was her moment, she presented her findings clearly and systematically. She showed the surveys, deeds, and photographs, pointing out discrepancies in the HOA's claims and highlighting the legal basis for her ownership. Her tone was firm but respectful, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The board members exchanged glances. Some looked surprised, while others attempted to dismiss the evidence. They questioned her documents, citing possible errors or ambiguities. She responded carefully, referring to the official records, cross-references, and legal guidance. Each point she made was backed by clear evidence, and slowly the board's confidence began to waver. She realized that knowledge and preparation were her strongest tools, far stronger than fear or intimidation. During the meeting, tensions rose at times. One board member attempted to intimidate her, suggesting that ignoring HOA rules could lead to legal consequences. She remained composed, calmly explaining that her evidence proved her ownership and that any further unauthorized actions would be considered illegal. The conversation was intense, but she refused to back down. She felt a growing sense of empowerment, knowing that she was standing on solid ground. As the meeting progressed, she noticed a subtle shift. Some board members began to acknowledge the validity of her claims, while others remained defensive. She remained patient, allowing the facts to speak for themselves. By the end of the meeting, the board agreed to review her evidence further and promised to halt any immediate actions on her property. It was not a complete victory, but it was a significant step. She had forced them to recognize her position. She knew that she now had leverage for the next steps. After the meeting, she reflected on the experience. The confrontation had been challenging, but it had also been empowering. She realized that staying calm, organized, and factual was far more effective than reacting with anger or frustration. The HOA had assumed she would be intimidated, but her preparation and confidence had changed the dynamic. She had learned the power of knowledge, persistence, and strategic communication. The next days were a mix of relief and continued vigilance. She continued documenting everything, noting responses, actions, and communications from the HOA. She understood that the situation was far from resolved, but she now had a sense of control. Each day, she planned the restoration of her property, making lists of repairs and improvements and prioritizing tasks. The process of planning became a form of therapy. Giving her focus and purpose amid the ongoing challenges, neighbors began to notice the shift in her demeanor. Some approached her with curiosity, others with admiration. A few shared their own frustrations with the HOA, confirming that the overreach she experienced was not an isolated case. She realized that her actions could inspire others to understand their rights and stand up for themselves. The thought of helping others gave her additional motivation to continue her fight and to restore her property fully, while she worked on rebuilding her home and her confidence. She also anticipated possible resistance from the HOA. They might try to delay actions, question her evidence, or find procedural loopholes to regain control. She discussed these possibilities with her lawyer, strategizing for every potential scenario. This preparation gave her a sense of readiness and reduced the anxiety that had been overwhelming in the previous weeks. As she moved forward, she also focused on emotional resilience. The stress of the confrontation, the fear of further destruction, and the weight of standing up to a powerful organization could have been overwhelming. She practiced mindfulness, spent time in her partially restored garden, and reminded herself of the progress she had made. Each small victory, each acknowledgement from the board, and each step in restoring her property reinforced her sense of control and self-assurance. Through this journey, she discovered a deeper understanding of community dynamics, bureaucracy, and personal empowerment. She realized that knowledge was not just about winning a dispute, but about reclaiming a sense of autonomy and confidence. She learned that fear and intimidation could be countered with preparation, patience, and clarity. She also learned the importance of persistence, as the path to justice was rarely straightforward or easy in the evenings. She would sit quietly in her home, reviewing the day's events and planning for the next. She reflected on how much she had grown in a short time. From a homeowner intimidated by notices to a person capable of confronting a powerful organization with confidence and clarity, she felt a sense of pride, not just for the progress she had made with her property, but for the inner strength she had discovered within herself. The confrontation with the HOA marked a turning point. She had moved from being reactive to proactive, from confusion to clarity. She understood that the fight was not over, but she had laid the groundwork for reclaiming her property and ensuring that such overreach would not happen again. The combination of legal knowledge, meticulous documentation, strategic communication, and emotional resilience had shifted the balance of power, as Part 4 concluded. She felt a renewed sense of determination. The next steps would involve careful negotiation, restoration of her property, and ensuring that the HOA recognized the limits of their authority. She had faced a powerful organization, confronted their assumptions, and asserted her rights with clarity and courage. The journey had been difficult, but it had also been transformative, revealing her ability to face challenges, stand firm, and reclaim what was rightfully hers. The stage was set for the final chapter, where restoration, resolution, and a sense of triumph awaited after months of tension. Research and careful preparation, the moment of restoration finally arrived. She had spent countless hours documenting her property, studying legal documents, consulting her lawyer, and preparing for every possible reaction from the HOA now. With a clear understanding of her rights and a carefully planned approach, she was ready to reclaim her home fully. The process was both physical and emotional, and she felt a mix of anticipation, relief, and determination. The first step was to assess the damage that had been done by the HOA. Her once thriving garden had been trampled, the shed demolished, and fences partially removed. Each area told a story of overreach and carelessness, but she refused to let it define her. She walked slowly through the yard, taking photographs, making notes, and planning how to restore each part. It was a meticulous process, but one that gave her a sense of control and purpose. She understood that restoring the property was about more than just fixing physical damage. It was about reclaiming her space and her sense of autonomy. She began with the shed, a structure that had held personal items and memories. She hired a contractor to rebuild it according to the original design, ensuring that it would be stronger and more secure. Each nail, board, and coat of paint felt symbolic, a physical representation of her reclaiming what had been taken. As the shed took shape, she felt a sense of satisfaction and empowerment. The act of rebuilding was therapeutic, helping her move past the fear and frustration that had dominated the previous months. Next, she focused on the fences. These had not only provided privacy, but also a sense of boundary and order. She chose durable materials and worked with a team to restore the fences to their full height and strength. As each panel was installed, she walked along the perimeter, envisioning the yard as it once was. With each completed section, her confidence grew, and the sense of intrusion began to fade. The yard was becoming her sanctuary once again, a place where she could feel safe and in control. The garden required special attention. The trampled flower beds had to be replanted, and the soil needed enrichment. She spent hours selecting plants, arranging them carefully, and planting them herself. The process was slow and methodical, but it allowed her to connect deeply with her home. She imagined how each flower would bloom, bringing color and life back to the yard. Each seed and plant symbolized hope, resilience, and the ability to rebuild after adversity. It was not just a garden. It was a testament to her perseverance. As the physical restoration continued, she also addressed the legal and bureaucratic aspects. She continued to communicate with the HOA, ensuring they acknowledged her ownership and understood the limits of their authority. She sent updated documents and photographs of the restored property, making it clear that any further unauthorized actions would not be tolerated. Her approach was firm but professional, leaving no room for misunderstanding. The HOA, now aware that she would defend her rights vigorously, became more cautious in their communications. During this period, neighbors began to take notice of her progress. Some expressed admiration and support, others shared their own frustrations, and a few quietly acknowledged the power of her determination. She realized that her actions were influencing others, demonstrating that knowledge, preparation, and persistence could change the dynamic between homeowners and the HOA. This awareness gave her additional motivation to continue her efforts and restore her property fully while the restoration was ongoing. She reflected on the lessons she had learned. She had discovered a deep well of resilience within herself, as well as the importance of patience, careful planning, and clear communication. She had learned that fear and intimidation could be countered with preparation and knowledge, and that standing firm on her rights was not only necessary, but empowering. The journey had transformed her understanding of herself and her role as a homeowner. The financial aspects of the restoration were significant. But she approached them pragmatically. She created a detailed budget, prioritized repairs, and sought estimates from multiple contractors. Each decision was deliberate, ensuring that resources were used efficiently without compromising quality. She understood that reclaiming her property was an investment in both her home and her peace of mind. Every expense, every hour of labor, was a step toward restoring what had been taken and asserting her autonomy. Emotionally, the process was both exhausting and rewarding. There were moments of doubt and frustration, especially when setbacks occurred or work took longer than expected. Yet each completed task brought a sense of accomplishment and relief. She found solace in small victories: the rebuilt shed, the restored fences, the newly planted garden. Each milestone was a reminder that she had the power to overcome challenges and reclaim control of her life. As the restoration neared completion, she began to think about the future. She wanted to ensure that the HOA could not repeat such actions and that her rights would remain protected. She updated her legal documents, maintained detailed records, and established a clear communication protocol with the HOA. She understood that vigilance was necessary to prevent future conflicts, and that proactive measures could safeguard her property and peace of mind. The emotional transformation she experienced was profound. From feeling powerless and intimidated, she had become confident, informed, and assertive. The process of reclaiming her property had revealed strengths she had never fully recognized. The satisfaction of standing up for herself was immense. She had not only restored her home, but also her sense of dignity, autonomy, and self-assurance. Neighbors who had once been silent began to engage more openly. Some asked for advice on how to handle HOA issues, while others shared their own experiences and expressed admiration for her persistence. She realized that her journey had broader implications, serving as an example of how individuals could assert their rights and navigate complex situations with determination and preparation. This awareness added a new layer of fulfillment, knowing that her efforts could inspire and empower others. Finally, the day came when the restoration was complete. The shed stood rebuilt, fences secure and imposing, and the garden vibrant and full of life. Walking through her yard, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment and relief. The physical transformation mirrored the emotional journey she had undergone, symbolizing resilience, empowerment, and triumph over adversity. She had reclaimed not just her property, but her sense of control and self-worth. In the aftermath, she continued to maintain vigilance, regularly checking records, monitoring communications from the HOA, and documenting any interactions. She understood that the journey was ongoing, but she now had the tools, knowledge, and confidence to manage future challenges. Her home was once again a place of peace, security, and pride, and she felt empowered to protect it. The experience also left a lasting impact on her personal growth. She had learned the importance of understanding her rights, preparing meticulously, and confronting challenges with clarity and calm. She had discovered a strength she had not known she possessed, and the process of standing up for herself had deepened her sense of self-respect and resilience. She knew that these lessons would stay with her, guiding her in future endeavors and decisions. Reflecting on the journey, she realized that what had once seemed like an insurmountable challenge had become an opportunity for growth, empowerment, and transformation. The destruction wrought by the HOA had initially caused fear, frustration, and despair, but it had also sparked a process of discovery, preparation, and action. Through determination, knowledge, and persistence, she had reclaimed her property, restored her home, and affirmed her rights. In the end, she stood in her fully restored yard, feeling a sense of triumph and peace. The journey had tested her patience, resilience, and courage, but it had also revealed her strength, knowledge, and ability to take control of her life. She had turned a situation of loss and intimidation into a story of empowerment and victory. Her home was her sanctuary once more. She knew that she had the ability to protect it and herself against any future challenges. The story concluded not just with restored property, but with a restored sense of confidence, justice, and empowerment. marking the successful resolution of a long and challenging journey.